Okay, good evening, everybody. It's 5 o'clock, so I think we'll start the webinar. So can I ask the presenters just to show their screens there so we can see who we have on the line. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar tonight. As most of you are aware, ourselves in Teagasc, the IFA and Board BIA, over the last couple of years have been looking at the fresh chip sector to try and see, are there knowledge gaps that you as growers are finding when you're trying to produce good quality fresh chip and processing potatoes. So with that in mind tonight, what we're looking at, one of the key issues that has arisen over the last 12 months or so, which is the loss of CIPC. So how can we prevent storage or prevent sprouting in storage with the loss of CIPC? So I'm glad to say to address that issue tonight, we have a truly international panel of experts who are going to try and address different parts of the conundrum, if you like. So firstly, we have Professor Nora Olsen, who is the current director of World Potato Congress, and she's also a potato specialist based in the University of Idaho over in the US. So Nora is going to give us a flavor of how they do it pretty much in the US and look at what systems they have put in place, and kind of we can learn from their mistakes, if you like, and learn from their learning curves. She also has quite a bit of experience of DMN, or one for site that most of you are probably inquiring about, and maleic hydroside or phaser, so we can ask her a little bit about that. The second presentation then tonight is a dual presentation, and we have AJ Gina from Dawnfresh in the UK and Stephen McCabe from Haggard Stores up in the Northeast, and most of the growers up that part of the world are pretty familiar with Stephen. So the two guys have been applying one for site or DMN in store in Ireland for the last 2 seasons. So basically what they're going to do is give you the Irish experience and see what they're finding on the ground, how they're using it, how they're applying it, and the results that they're getting out the far side. And finally then, for any of you that have been with us for the last year or so on this project, you'll have met Simon Alexander from SA Consulting in Norfolk. Simon deals with a lot of growers who supply fresh chip, not only in the UK, but also here, but also processing sectors as well. So Simon's going to look at the current issues that he's finding out there in store, arising from the problems he's found over the last couple of weeks. He's basically got Donegal weather in the last couple of weeks, so there's plenty of rain, plenty of muck, all that type of thing. So he's going to address some of the issues that he's seeing over there. So basically, just a bit of housekeeping. The presentations are going to be about 15 minutes a piece. So the whole lot should take about 45 minutes. And after that, then we'll have about 15 minutes for a Q&A session. And I'd ask you then to participate at that stage. There's a Q&A tab or a chat tab down at the bottom of your screens. So just click on that, ask your question. And if I can ask you to say who you're addressing the question to, it makes it easier for me to decipher who should answer the question. And finally then, if we don't get to all the questions, if you send me, we'll try and send the questions. If we don't get to them tonight, we'll send on the questions to each of the presenters, sorry, should I say, and we'll try and get them to answer the questions as best they possibly can. And when we put the recording up on the Teagasc YouTube channel in a couple of days or so, we'll hopefully have the answers to those questions there at the end of that presentation. Okay, so listen, without further ado, I'm going to ask the presenters to turn off the screens with the exception of Nora, who's going to be first up. So Nora, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, and we'll go from there.
You think by now I'd learn how to use Zoom.
Well done.
I will get there. So I would like to just introduce myself. I'm Nora Olsen with the University of Idaho, and located in the United States. And it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to be involved in this webinar and this discussion today. And obviously, I'm very looking forward to 2022 in terms of the opportunity to come to Dublin for the World Potato Congress. And obviously, for anybody involved in the potato industry, one of the most visited destinations or most wanted destinations to visit, of course, is Ireland. So I look forward to the opportunity. So just a little bit of background of where I'm located and some of the context of some of the conversations I'm going to have today about potato storage in general in the U.S. is that really we're a diverse locations of potato growing regions throughout the primarily the northern tier or the colder climates of the US. So then just highlighting up in the northwestern tier of the US is where I'm located in Idaho. And just to put a little bit of perspective in terms of our acreage and what we do in terms of where our marketing sector is, we have about 300,000 acres of potatoes in the state of Idaho alone, which is about 121,000 hectares. We are split between about 10% of our crop goes to seed, 25% fresh, and then obviously we're dominated by the process industry. Although we do have some people who go dual markets, meaning that they're gonna have potatoes that go both fresh and processed, and that decision could be made almost on the fly in terms of a year like this. The Pacific Northwest, which I have it highlighted in yellow, produces about 50% of the total US acreage. And the reason this is kind of important, and what I'm pointing out here, is that how important climate is in terms of, hopefully that worked, in terms of how we manage our storages. Our management has evolved because of our climate, and this northern tier allows for us to have this, just having difficulties here with my technology here, I apologize, is that because we have warm days during the growing season, cool nights in the evenings and during the days or nights, and then we have cold winters and low humidity. This allows us to really modify what we need to do in storage. And I realize that that does not account for potentially the maritime conditions, the higher humidity states. But again, I'm going to address much more those areas that we have that opportunity to really adjust that. We produce a lot of potatoes in a short amount of time, and that could be almost to our detriment or downfall. And so we have potatoes that go in very fast in a lot of bulk very quickly. And that also doesn't allow us to really pivot or adjust very quickly, primarily because our harvest season or that window, let's just say, can be very short for us. Predominantly all the potatoes grown in this area are bulk piled. We either use above ground duct systems like you see here, which is very common in the state of Idaho, much more because we have dirt floors with above ground duct systems. But much more maybe in the Columbia Basin of Washington and Oregon, which we talk about in that other part of the region, or in other regions of the US, they actually may have in-floor duct systems. So it really can vary depending upon maybe other types of storages capacity that you need, the ability to flume potatoes out, all of those kind of things can adjust based upon. But predominantly, at least in the state of Idaho, we are dominated by above floor plenums. Here's just kind of an example of what our storages can look like. We do fill them very tall with a lot of bulk potatoes, and again, does not give a lot of flexibility for us. One of the things that we have been doing is building very large storages. And some of these storages have what we call a split base storage with one ventilation system. So you may have 150 million pounds of potatoes on one side of the bay, and then another bay has another. And so the difficulty is in that, yes, we can put away, again, store a lot of potatoes under a common roof, but again, you're not able to manage small areas that then have problems. Or if you're harvesting under different weather conditions, again, it doesn't allow you to pivot very easily. So we're really trying to kind of micromanage some of these areas within these storages, or make decisions that can affect all the potatoes, and that can be very costly or very difficult sometimes. Almost all storages, especially in the Northwest, again, not including the Maritimes, the far western areas, is that we will use evaporative cooling systems. This allows us to have humidity at about close to about 85%, give or take. And so that's kind of a nice background base of humidification to have. And then we're allowed to maybe have a supplemental. Here's an example of a centrifugal humidifier that gives us some supplemental humidification when we need it. There's a couple reasons why we really are the backbone of our storages, rely upon evaporative cooling pads, is because not only does it give humidification, but it also allows us to bring in a little bit warmer air and due to evaporative cooling, allows that air to cool. And then we're able to extend our cooling opportunities for those storages. We do battle condensation, both on the walls, within the pile. And again, a lot of that is just because we're bringing a lot of potatoes in, and they can have very variable conditions, pulp temperatures, soil moisture, all of that. And so we do definitely battle condensation. Plus two, we're keeping a lot of our processed potatoes a little bit on the warmer side. And then of course we have cool outside temperatures outside of the building. So a constant battle. As with you and many of the other parts of Europe and the world, we are all computerized. We all get information on our smartphones, things like that. One thing that we've noticed too is that we do measure carbon dioxide, but we don't rely upon those numbers as much to maybe manage our storages. We manage our storages primarily because of that bulk pile is the differential in temperature from the bottom of the pile to the top of the pile. And so we're modifying our ventilation system and bringing in outside air to maintain that temperature. And so CO2 in some storages are monitored, but it is not a norm for a lot of our storages, nor do we necessarily manage based upon those numbers. It's a little bit different than some of the other countries that we see. We do in certain regions rely upon refrigeration. And again, that depends upon where you're located, how long you're going to store those potatoes, whether we might use refrigeration early on when we first put the potatoes into storage, if it is on the warmer side, or if we need to extend our season and make sure that we have the ability to cool those potatoes or keep them cool for the rest of until the following year. And so refrigeration can be a common practice, but it's not always. And so really our dependence upon cool outside air is very strong. And so this is every day you've got fresh air coming into these potatoes, cooling them off, using that in terms of not necessarily using refrigeration. And a lot of storages actually do not have refrigeration. But as with any system, we can have a lot of failures too. And here's just an example of a major failure in one of our storages. So what brings upon those failures? Well, you can imagine obviously any kind of rock coming into a large bulk pile. It never happens at the edges of the pile. It's always going to happen in the middle where a lot of problems can occur. So what do we see? A lot of wet rots coming in. Potentially we have condensation events. This particular storage had some fans that were going the opposite direction. They had a lot of failure in insulation, so a lot of condensation was occurring. Plus we had a variety that was very susceptible to decay and rot. And so there were some issues there. But obviously you can imagine there's a whole array of issues that can occur when you have potatoes in a bulk storage like this. So obviously our ideal situation is to shoot for something similar to this. So I was asked to talk a little bit about sprout control options. And so obviously we want to store potatoes at the coolest potato temperature possible. And that is the directive for any potatoes worldwide. We select the variety that is the best suited for the market, the intended market for us, plus then we store it at our coolest temperatures. Now, one of the conversations we're having today is about fresh cut crisps. And so obviously our potatoes are dominated by processed potatoes. We're very concerned about cold temperatures. We're very concerned about sugar concentrations and fry color. But we did have a shift a few years ago about fresh cut crisps, in particular a company called Five Guys Burgers and Fries, and coming into Idaho and wanting to use some of these cold store potatoes and using them for fresh cut fries. And so even with that, we realized that those low storage temperatures can have a unique, obviously, impact even in this sector. As you're well familiar with talking about sugar concentrations and fry color and that close association, that a lot of varieties have a very much of a cutting point or a time where they definitely shift. And here's just an example. Russet North Dakota would never be one that would fry, but some people were trying to use them as a fresh cut fry. And you can see when you start to hold them at cold temperatures, obviously the color is just not acceptable. But you can also see by these certain lines here is that you can adjust and see that you can be acceptable at certain temperatures. Again, every variety has some sort of a breaking point. Let me get rid of my pointer here. The other component is in terms of not being able to always use variety selection. Sometimes that's mandated by our market, but that's obviously our first line of defense in terms of sprout control options. Not always having the opportunity to use low storage temperatures. So we must rely upon product application. And these would be rather in the field, in the storage, or we do have the opportunity to have for our fresh market or aware market to have a spray application at the packing shed. So here's just a list of the major sprout control products in the US. CIPC is our predominant product use. And I won't belabor it too much, but I will talk a little bit about that. We do use MH30, DMN, Smart Block, and I know these are not registered in your area, 1,4-Zap or 1-octanol, DIPN, and then we use the essential oils as well. They are primarily thermally applied, except for if you're doing an at-packing spray application, which primarily we see with CIPC or the clove oil. They can be a single product, either alone, or they will mix either in sequence or actually physically mix them together. And really the rates are going to be very dependent upon variety, storage duration, storage temperature, and all those things. So the key component here is that there's not a one-size-fit-all sprout control program for all varieties. They really have to be tailor specific, tailor-made to fit the variety, to the market, and the temperature. One of the things that we also adjust for is that some of our retailers prefer to have blackened eyes, they call them. To them is that even though on the left-hand side, you can see that those potatoes most likely will not sprout or elongate much further than that peeping stage, the retailers prefer to have a blackened eye depicted on the right-hand side. And we accomplish this with a couple different products that may be applied after CIPC or at the fresh pack operation. So CIPC in general, I just want to point out the differences that between Europe and what we have done is that we typically only had 1 or even 2 applications, and that was it. And so I think that's a little bit different in terms of where we rely upon CIPC. Also, we are so far away from our markets in the US. Let's just say, for example, if we are trucking from Idaho all the way to our eastern side of our country, is that by truck, it could be up to 14 days until maybe even a customer would ever purchase it. If we shipped it by rail, it would be up to 30 days. And so our reliance upon CIPC or a very strong sprout inhibitor is the backbone to our industry and our distribution of potatoes throughout the whole storage season. When you start talking about export and where we're going with export, we're talking about 3 weeks to over 5 weeks. In terms of the ability that we have to be able to have those potatoes sprout inhibited when we start going to some of our export markets. So again, our reliance upon CIPC, you can see. So we look to you guys in terms of our abilities to see what happens in the future, how we're going to rely upon other products besides that. One good news for us, at least, is that we were just granted re-registration of CIPC for an additional 15 years. And again, that does not mean that we're not looking at alternatives, but the way that we have been using CIPC and having our MRLs at 30 part per million has allowed us a lot more flexibility in terms of our CIPC use. That being said, let's talk about some of the products that you can use or that will be coming to you. Is it maleic hydrazide? In the Northwest, as I described, we use about 20% of our acres are treated with maleic hydrazide. We use it primarily much more to alter tuber size, volunteer potato control, but we also use it for sprout control and storage. One of the things that we talk about with maleic hydrazide is that there's an art and science to MH, for sure. And that's going to really be dependent upon your rate, your variety, your application timing, your application method. All of these things can really play into that art as well as science part of applying MH. And I think this is why MH can be a little bit frustrating due to the art side of applying it. Here's a little bit of research that we've done. Again, this is on Burbank, russet Burbank. That's a very long dormancy variety. But what I want to point out just real quickly here is that we applied MH at different timings. MH here is either 5 weeks prior to vine kill or 3 weeks prior to vine kill. And one of the things that I wanted to point out here is that if you have the untreated, obviously they're growing very, very quickly in storage, indicated by the blue line on the graph. But what we see, and this has been consistent with different varieties, different years, all of that, is that timing can make a huge difference in terms of how well MH30 works or not. And just again, the example is that the earlier we apply it, meaning earlier in the growing season, so more weeks prior to vine kill, the better control we had in storage. We also see, and I'll just point out here on the right-hand side where we've done different sprout rating scale, is that once they get to a certain level of a number 3, let's just say, where they're actually starting to elongate, where we call dormancy break, is with MH, we often see that you're going to get about an additional anywhere between roughly, let's just say 30 days before they start to break. Again, you're not really eliminating peeping or sprout development at the smaller stages. What you're seeing is that you're really trying to limit the amount of kind of sprout growth overall. And here's a good example, and I know they're all kind of put together, but one thing is you can see in the middle, that's the early MH application. Right to the right of it is the late MH application. Here we have them some in combination with CIPC and compared to the untreated control. And this is in July. So again, you still have sprout development. You're just going to have to follow up with something else to really remove those sprouts. The other thing that we really like about MH in a non-CIPC program is you can see, and again, it's by variety, but you can see that it actually promotes sprout to grow or to bud out at all the eyes. And this really allows much greater opportunity and much more consistency in coming back in with another product, such as DMN or clove oil or mint oil or anything else like that. So just a little bit of follow-up. We do see MH30 or MH used quite a bit. Some of it will be alone, and those are for early markets only or for early processing markets, primarily because with processing potatoes, you can allow a little bit of sprout development to go. DMN, I won't talk too much because I know that we're going to talk a lot about that, but in the US, even though it is used for sprout, for dormancy enhancement, for sprout control, we definitely see it used in a lot more for additional benefits. And you'll see the rates be a little bit lower application rates in the US because of that. They're looking at bruise benefits, shrinkage, and that synergistic combination with CIPC in terms of having just better sprout control. And I think this is a good example of where we are headed in the US, is not the single reliance upon CIPC. We're seeing these combinations come in, and we're seeing these programs put together. And I think that's really important in terms of how we're all evolving globally on how to handle sprout control and the diversity that we have in terms of varieties and sprouting characteristics. We do use it on seed. It is registered for seed. I would say that quite a bit is used on seed. And there are DMN canisters, aerosol canisters that can be used for shipping containers as well. So again, the diversity is there. We have clove oil, mint oil, and I've highlighted clove oil, and primarily that's because clove oil is the predominant essential oil that we use, although we do have mint oil available. This is definitely talk about art and science to MH. There's art and science for sure, maybe even much more art to a lot of the essential oils. And again, these are much more used for either rescue treatments or to blacken those eyes, or predominantly in our organic system, or again in those synergistic kind of combinations with clove oil to really make CIPC work better, or to move in that direction. These are products that have to be applied several times in the storage season on a very consistent basis. And the reason for that is that once you start applying, it's almost like you're just burning off or physically damaging that sprout, and more sprouts are going to want to grow from that region. Here's an example where we've been able to use spearmint oil and peppermint oil But if you noticed here, is that we used 8 applications in 9 months. This was a very aggressive program. This is not, this I would say would be atypical of a lot of varieties, just because it would be cost prohibitive in a lot of ways to be able to do that many applications on some of, at least in the US. One question we often get is the why are we not using ethylene? One of the things that I pointed out earlier is just our reliance upon outside air, is that is a dominant part of our program. And so it makes it very difficult to maintain certain parts per million of ethylene at a consistent level in our storages. And so really our industry has not gone that way at that point. But again, we're looking at any and all kind of opportunities for additional sprout control. We need something that can be thermally applied into our storages. And obviously this bulk situation, these large bulk situations can make it very difficult or cumbersome. And how are we going to apply certain products? So just in conclusion, we're looking at single products for our sprout control programs, but really we're evolving into these combination programs. And that is because we're trying to fine tune sprout control. We have new varieties. We're evolving in terms of our varieties. I think we're excited to see a lot of more of the European style variety selection come our way, which has been great. And but that really then changes our programs, because we now need to adjust for some of these different dormancy lengths and aggressiveness of some of those sprouts. What we see overall in storage management, I would say this climate, this impact of climate, temperatures changing on us. How are we going to adjust for this? And I think that's where we're starting to see a lot more of our storage evolve. We're starting to probably bring in a little bit more of that European style of airflow, ventilation aggressiveness, but still maintaining based upon our management, based upon our climate. And I would say universal to everybody, the quality mandate continues to grow. And how are we going to adjust for that based upon using some new technology and obviously variety selection? So I apologize for my technical difficulties. I will keep practicing the Zoom thing, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Don't worry, Nora. It definitely was worth waiting for. So what we'll do is we'll get through the other presentations, and what we'll do is there are questions coming in. So if you don't mind, we'll get you to answer those questions at the end of the session. So I think AJ, if you don't mind, or Stephen, whichever you are up first, if you don't mind just sharing your screen and putting your camera on. There you are, AJ.
No worries. I'll start off and then Stephen will carry on. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick introduction into DMN, and then Stephen's going to do most of the talking about the use in Ireland. So as Shay said already, Dawnfresh are the registration holders around Europe, and Teagasc stores are our distributors and advisors in Ireland. So a bit more about the company. So Dawnfresh is a Scottish company, and it deals with registrations around Europe. Set up in 2000, and we're part of a bigger group, the 1-4 group, which is on Nora's doorstep over in Idaho. I think Nora's already mentioned that they have various products over there, you know, like the 1-4 site, 1-4 seed and 1-4 ship. They're all basically DMN, and in the future we'll be looking at trying to register some of these products over here. They also manufacture machinery, and as over here, have a high level of technical support using our product through directly or through our distributors. Just a bit about registration. So I think we're quite lucky that, you know, that we have got registration in most of the important countries around Europe. You know, just this year, you can see that obviously increased in the number of registrations from April this year until the latest one is Serbia. We're still waiting for registration in countries, and one of the biggest countries obviously is the UK. So there's an opportunity there for you guys still to keep exporting products. So at the moment we don't have registration in the UK, and I think that we should hear back from the authorities by March next year, and then we'll know then a bit better. So just moving straight on now to jumping right into 1-4 site or DMN. the active ingredient and how it works really is that it's not like CIPC or the burn products that are out there that will burn sprouts back. And CIPC just stops cell division, but what DMN actually does is it changes the potato on the inside. So when you apply DMN, and the research from Penn State University told us that it upscales or downscales various genes. And as part of that, some of these genes are associated with producing inhibitory proteins. And these inhibitory proteins are the proteins that actually then stop any development of sprouting. So really what we want to try and achieve, this project was done measuring residue levels at various intervals. And after 2 days after application, we found that, in this trial that getting a level of between 4 and 5 parts per million, so 4.7, the effect of that is actually to repress all genes associated with growth. So our target really from applications is to optimize your applications to try and get between 4 and 5 parts per million to give you the best efficacy. So once the proteins are built up, they will break down over time. And usually that will begin anywhere from 7 days onwards. So in terms of actually seeing the visual signs of dormancy break for us is actually when you first start to see fresh sprout growth and sprout re-sprouting. And that can occur in commercial stores anywhere from 4 weeks. Now we've noticed that to well over 12 weeks as well. And again, this is all dependent on how well you keep the product in the store, how active your store is, what temperature and how active your crop is and what temperature you're storing that crop at, the amount of ventilation you have. And these are the kind of parameters which Stephen will cover as well in some detail. So just to recap on the mode of action really is that what we're trying to do is to get a high level of residue on the potatoes during the application. The higher the level we can get, the more inhibitory proteins are produced, and the higher the level of inhibitory proteins, the longer inhibition we can get in store. Obviously there are various things that will affect that in commercial stores, as we're aware of. And then just some basic messages really. I know I've jumped straight into this really, but CIPC is not DMN, and if you use CIPC in the past, I think we have to try and forget about a lot of the things associated with CIPC. It is the most of CIPC. There is no product out there as effective and as efficient as CIPC. So at the moment, you have to look at the products you've got, and one of those is DMN. As part of the general training, and also to be able to use the product efficiently, we also have a technical manual. So that's the Dawn Fresh technical manual that's available on our website. And then we also, there's a lot of considerations. Again, Stephen will go through some of these in more detail in a few minutes. But really, in terms of the most important things I just listed there, prepare, obviously, store preparation, consider your applications, when and how you do your first applications, and also quite importantly really is actually the crops. You can use as little as possible to get effective control over the season, and the only way you can do that is to have close observations and to look out for new sprouting. So, and if you guys, if you haven't seen the technical manual, there's a QR code here, so you're quite welcome to try and use your camera to get to it, or just go back to the Dawn Fresh website, where you'll find the technical manual in various languages, and also if you need any information from us, my contact details are below. And that's all I have to say, Shay. So.
Brilliant, AJ. Yeah, that's a good insight, if you want, pardon the pun, into one for sight. So what we'll do is we'll get Stephen, if you don't mind, to just take the story on from there. Stephen, you've had a good bit of experience along with AJ with Irish stores and how guys are using it over here. So you might just take us through what you're seeing in Ireland.
No problem. Thanks, AJ. Thanks, Shay, for having me. Can you see my screen? Can,
of course, yeah.
Okay, so for anybody who doesn't know me or Hagrid Stores, I'm an Agronomy Hagrid Stores. We're based in North County Dublin. In 2018, we got the distributorship for 1 site, and we invested in a an electric fogger, sign fog. And so now we have a team on the road from October until June, treating stores up and down the country. What I'm here today is really just to, let's see if I can go through it now. Oh, there we are. Yeah, I'm going to fairly quickly go through 1-4 site in Ireland, and I'll break it down into 3 key areas that we see to get the best out of 1-4 site in terms of efficacy and prolonged sprout suppressant. So one of them will be filling the store pre-application. The second phase we see is very important is the first application, and then the final one will be post-application and reassessing or assessing when is best to come in again with your second application or any subsequent applications. And then just at the very end, then I'll talk about our experiences for the last 2 seasons. So 1-4 site in Ireland, they got registration in October 2018, and fairly shortly after that, just at the end of October, we treated our first store, a 1,400-ton store of Sassy in County Meath. On the label, the max individual dose is 20 ml per ton at any one time, with a total dose of 120 mils. There is a 30-day withholding period before you use the product out of the store. That's just something to bear in mind. So that's the electric fog that we have. It's a silent fog. It's a fairly quiet and efficient machine. It runs roughly at 350 degrees, and it takes about 40 minutes to put 10 litres of 1-4 site into a store. We find best use, or we require growers to have fridges turned off up to 24 hours in advance, just to have a more even temperature within the store. So especially within a fridge unit, you don't have very low temperatures and an imbalance, or you don't have any issues with condensations in the store. During application, fan speed is reduced to 30%, very, very slow. And if you don't have variable rate fans within the store, that you're turning on and off your fans every few minutes, just to move the product throughout the store. After application, all the doors are closed to allow 1-4 site to settle onto the potatoes for 48 hours. A guideline, it's not prescriptive because that's definitely varies between varieties and harvest conditions and length of storage. But basically, that's something we look at when we're storing. The most important thing, I suppose, in that is that your first application goes on as early as you possibly can. I'll go into that more detail there later on, but that chart really demonstrates the different rates that we look at for different systems, I suppose, like when you have a cold store, or even when you're using maleic hydroside during the growing, that you can probably get by with less during the storage season. So the first phase is in getting the most out of 1-4 site is filling the store. The tubers should be as clean as possible. Now that's not, you don't have to be absolutely very, very clean, but as free from soil as possible, that you don't have a huge amount of soil covering the tuber. So the actual skin of the tuber is uncovered to take in as much 1-4 site as possible. The potatoes should be dry. They need to be dry because 1-4 site is hydrophobic, but there's no need to wait until the potatoes are cured. So you can go in once the potatoes are dry. So that's fairly early. It's a lot earlier than you would have with CIPC, for example. As I said, yeah, potatoes they need to be dry. 1-4 site doesn't like wet potatoes. And the store should be filled full to design capacity in as short a period as possible. So you're not having potatoes in at the back of the store that are there for a week or 2 weeks, and with chances of sprouting, and then you're filling up them later on. So you're trying to get it all done in a short period as possible. And it works best when the store is ventilated at filling, because you do get gases from forklifts, and if it's not vented, they're not allowed to come out of the store. They can be closed in the store, and that can cause issues after that. When storing, we found this is a big problem with some stores now, that boxes, especially in box stores, that they're just put in anyway most convenient way. And thought isn't given a huge amount to getting the best out of air circulation. And that includes shoulders, so there's shortcuts of air in certain parts of the store. There's boxes left out randomly close to the door, so you don't have a compact unit of boxes that allow the air to move through all areas of them equally. This is a small little video, I hope you can all see it, but it demonstrates the machine, the size of the machine, and I just want people to be thinking about it when the machine does come onto your farm, that the position is important. So it has to be close to a three-phase power supply. It's a very easy and simple process, and it's quiet, as you can hear. This is the next phase then. So first application, when you have decided to do first application of 1,4 site, early application is very important, because an early application gives you more effective and prolonged sprout control. When you wait for sprout control to start, you're going to have a reduction in quality of that potato. So once those potatoes are dry, that's when you should be going in with 1,4 site. The temperature in the store should be fairly similar the whole way through the store, because when there's a condensation risk, you have problems with putting in a chemical into a store for obvious reasons. So that's why we ask the fridge to be turned off before application. In most cases, up to 24 hours in advance, so that the temperature is fairly similar, and you don't have frosted area, say, around the fridge unit, for example. Before that first application, so just after drying, it's not a bad idea to flush the store. So my previous point there was that airflow during filling is very important, but it's not a bad idea to give the store a good flush before the application is made, just to make sure there's no CO2 build-up in the store, because after the first application is done, that store will be closed for 48 hours. So it's pretty important to have it clear of any CO2, especially ethylene, that cover combustible gases that could be in the store. During application, fans, as I did before, run at approximately 30% internal recirculation only. And after application, all fans and fridges are closed for 24 to 48 hours. We find that 48 hours is better. If all doors can be closed for that period, it just allows the product to settle down into tomatoes better. So the next period is the storage period. Okay. This is something that probably should be thought of before the potato is stored. The potatoes are stored, but it's certainly something to be thinking about, because it will affect how long we're going to get in between applications on 1,4 site. 1,4 site is a very volatile product. It's over 100 times more volatile than CIPC. So the more leak-proof your store is, the less product that will be used per season. So it's another thing then as well to consider is CO2 management. If CO2 is managed in the store, because potatoes that are treated with 1,4 site respire less, they produce less CO2. So within that store, less CO2 is produced. So there's a reduced need to flush those stores, as what would happen with other sprout suppressants. In certain stores in Europe that are treated with 1,4 site, they are letting the levels build up to over 4,500 parts per million before they flush it. And that just means that 1,4 site is kept in the store, and they're getting longer periods between application. And to make that possible, monitoring is advisable. So we have a few stores that have handheld monitors that will go in, or even in some of the newer stores that they have it's built into the store units, and they can just see the levels of CO2, and people are more confident then that they don't have to be flushing it all the time. There's a lot of studies out now that are showing that CO2 does not affect fry colour, and that's just something to bear in mind. Some of the causes that can cause CO2 in store to build, for example, stress at harvest, as I said before, the high levels from forklift, filling, the temperatures you're keeping your potatoes, and the varieties. Varieties will respire more or less than other varieties. So just starting to think about when to have the next application, it's important just to be monitoring those potatoes. What we've found is that we go into potatoes and we'll take out a few sample potatoes and leave them at the edge of a box or on a wall, so you can come back and just keep an eye on them. And we're looking for this ideally just the blinking stage where you're seeing the first signs of sprouting, and that will more or less tell you when to go back in again. In certain stores, that's happening in between 4 to 6 weeks, and in stores, the first application was on early October, mid-October, and we've had to come back in fairly soon. But generally, we found that we can get a good 6 to 8 weeks out of it. But the potatoes themselves have to be monitored very well. So to decide which rate you're going to come back in with and when to do your subsequent applications, it does vary depending on many factors. For example, crop growing, the season that the potato has to grow in, weather it has to grow through, and the conditions of harvesting. Different varieties will have higher dormancy readings, the storage duration, temperature that you're keeping those potatoes at, how long you're going to be keeping them in the store before they're sold, and the ventilation type for sure, and the CO2 management. So how often that store has been flushed, or whether it's been allowed build to a certain level before it's flushed. The quality, so how many leakages are in the store. The store fill level. So if you have a half a store that's empty, you're putting this very volatile product, and it's going to obviously go into all the areas, and it's not going to completely get into the potatoes where you want it. This is an example of the store, the first store we actually did back in October 2018. We we learned a lot in that season. And that first season, we discovered that there was a lot of areas in the store that the air didn't flow into. So we had pockets that were sprouting, and we ended up using a lot of product, nearly 80 mils per ton over that season between October and July. Last season, 19 into 20, a lot of those issues were addressed. So the store was stored until July with only 50 mils per ton. The farmer or the grower, he sent us on this video. And what he was very impressed with was the quality of the potatoes coming out after such a long period. There was very little weight loss in the boxes. There was a lovely clean colour off the potatoes, and they were very, very firm, as hopefully you can see from the video. And also, just in that video there was very little loss coming as well. Like, so there was very little rotten potatoes after that long period of storage. So based on our experience, went to reapply in practice 6 to 8 weeks between treatments. That's what we've got. Of course, it depends on the store. A good properly managed store, and when I say a good store, I mean a store that's reasonably leak-proof and good airflow throughout all boxes, or in a bookstore, there's good airflow throughout that store. But it can be easily kept sprout-free until July with 1 full application and 3 halfway applications, as per that example of the store, the Sassy store. We found the nose test is very useful because you know DMN is in the store by there is a good smell of it. So if you go into that store and you're not getting a smell, you should be prepared to be treating that again fairly soon. Just some final points before I finish up. The 30-day withholding period before use of potatoes, as I said before. There is an animal feed restriction, that potatoes treated with 1,4 site can't be fed to animals. There's data submitted to the Department of Ag to reduce this restriction. Hopefully that will come through fairly soon and come off the label. Things that we found to bear in mind are certainly external conditions and application. Your air temperature, the wind speed, how humid it is outside. If it's very, very cold outside, it does make applying the product fairly hard. CIPC Emerson, so the MRL of CIPC at the moment is 10 parts per million, but it will be reduced to 0.4. 1,4 site will clean CIPC off fittings. So if a grower hasn't done that already, just to be prepared that there will be a level of CIPC, because it will be released into the store after using 1,4 site, and it will show up in potatoes. Probably not an issue now because the MRL is high for CIPC, but it will be an issue in the future. Lake hydrolite is a tool, especially in ambient stores, to get a long period between applications. It just keeps everything nice and easy. As AJ had said before, 1,4 site is not CIPC, so it's a totally different management techniques are used with 1,4 site. So in summary, Shay, it's our 3rd season using it. Close to 50,000 tonnes. That doesn't include revisits, so 50,000 stores. the tons in store has been treated to date, so we've plenty of experience and very, very happy growers. A quarter of that 50,000 are cold stores, so it's used in a wide range of stores from and varieties, from Rooster to the Pinks to Marquee and a lot of Christmas varieties too. An excellent control of spread, and we found an excellent feedback. And we've often even gone into stores a little bit late, not by design, of course, but the sprouts are a few millimeters long, and it does work as a burner too. The potatoes, as I said before, are lovely and firm. You've very little water loss in boxes compared to other sprout control. The potato doesn't grow, you see, it's kept asleep, I suppose, the whole period, so it's not trying to grow, it's not trying to use up internal reserves. So as I said before, respiration rates are lower, so you have less CO2. We found it's best to use an electrofogger because there's no combustible gases going into the store, and it just means you can fairly confidently keep that store fairly sealed and closed for longer periods of time. But I have to stress it is a hands-on management compared to other forms of spread suppressant. Potatoes have to be watched. There has to be thought, as I said before, put to airflow and things like that, more so than especially when CIPC was used, which was a cheaper spread suppressant. Testimony from that first grower, the sassy grower, was it was a very noticeable improvement in the condition of potatoes as they left the store compared to when CIPC was used. So he was very, very impressed, and it's definitely given us confidence to use the product going forward. That's all. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Stephen, for that. That's a fairly comprehensive insight into how it's being used here in Ireland. Just in the interest of time, we're way over time at the moment, and no Simon's come in yet. So if people stick with us, we'll probably run on 10 or 15 minutes over. So maybe we'll try and get finished by about 5:45, or sorry, 6:15. So Simon, can I get you to share your screen with us, and we'll let you at your presentation if you don't mind.
There we go.
Can see that.
See it, Shay?
Yep, can see that, no problem.
You can see that, brilliant, because all I can see is a picture of me still looking at you. So, right. Thank you very much for asking me to come and have a word. Basically, I've been asked to sort of comment on the problems that we're finding this year. Apparently, it's more like some of the Irish weather than we're used to seeing with regards to late lifting, and sort of one or two comments on early storage issues. There we are. That just sums up what we're seeing late lifting on some heavy soils. I think that just about tells the entire story. So basically, obviously, we're now putting into store potatoes that are a lot wetter and have got a lot more adhering mud to them. So the whole curing and drying process is becoming more difficult. We have had a lot of weather where we've had sort of 12 to 14, 15 degree days, high humidity, and not particularly cool nights. So using a lot of this air has become very, very difficult. So with wet conditions, we all know, especially when you're into slightly sticky areas, there is a greater risk of cut and slice tubers where shears are being lifted so the harvester can keep moving. And where we are seeing these high humidities, we're seeing poorer wound healing, as you can see from the photo on the right. That was us, a rooster that was took the photo this morning from stuff that's been in store 10 days. That's the store, the one on the left, well healed. It's the sorted 2 weeks earlier, and I don't hold out a massive amount of hope for that tuber on the right to look like the one on the left for probably another 3 to 4 weeks. It's also obviously a lot harder to see rots at intake. So certainly where we've had, roughly speaking, since the 23rd of September to the end of October, around about 9.5 inches of rain, and we've probably had another 2 since then. So we're sat somewhere around about 11 to 12 inches of rain since it started raining for us on the 3rd week of September. So yeah, it's harder to see rots. We've got waterlogged areas in fields, and there's definitely more rot coming into store, and obviously more adhering soil. And as of the end of this week, potentially we've got colder crops coming in as well, We had a colder snap about 10 days ago, crop coming in 6-7 degrees, and 3 days later the ambient was at 14-15. So on the back of that, we've also got protracted loading. So we're seeing situations where we've got stores that were started 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, had to pull out of that field because just couldn't move on to the next one. So we've got a wide range in loading times within the store. And going back to the comments that Stephen, etc., are making about and Nora about sort of loading and being able to be versatile with bulk stores and with older box stores, we've got the same situation. We're now blowing the living daylights out of stuff that's been in store 4 weeks to try and dry the stuff that's been in store for 4 days. Good air has not been available particularly, and at the moment, as I said, from that period from 23rd of September to the end of October, we actually only had 2 days with no rain measured whatsoever, and the humidities have been high. So it's taking a lot more effort. There's a lot more increased management time, and we're seeing a lot of variability of temperatures in stores. So there's stuff coming into warmer stores, colder spuds 10 days ago were sweating quite badly. So as if they weren't wet enough already, especially on the lighter soils, they were a lot wetter within 24 hours. So it's drying and curing is very difficult. All we can do is rely on large amounts of recirculation, bleeding in little bits of air, because we certainly can't put full ambient on. We can't be using the volumes of air as easily as Nora would be, certainly at this stage, because we've just got such a range of temperatures, and sweating up these spuds, especially stuff with an odd rot in it or two, is becoming far more difficult. So where possible, all you can do is look at your ducts in your bulk stores, the ones where the crops are dry, shut those down, blow the other ones during the day with recirculation, with a little bit of purging, etc. And then at night time, open them all up. Don't forget that even the early loader stuff does need air through it. And don't take for granted it's going to sit there and just let you ignore it for 10 days. Just a small touch on processing quality. Obviously, the stuff that has come in cold, there is more of a potential issue with variability in fry colour, and basically there is going to be a need on some of this later stuff to precondition. Obviously, my interest with yourselves has been on chip shop, and at the end of the day, chip shop quality is king. Nothing else matters other than quality, and if they aren't frying well, then you've got more of a problem. So keeping those stores a little bit warmer with this later lifted stuff, this cold lifted material may be necessary. Look at all the monitoring that we've spoken about in previous meetings and just manage stores accordingly. I mean, you've got to bear in mind that I'm making these comments very much based on a history of CIPC. I don't know how well we're going to precondition with the newer treatments. I think that's going to be a bit of a learning curve for all of us. And certainly CO2 levels, again, where you've got cold weather, wet spuds, and you're using a lot of recirculation to help dry these potatoes out, just be careful to keep an eye on your CO2 levels, because they get too high, you will stress those potatoes and you will cause problems. But all of that requires the right air, and at the moment that's becoming slightly more challenging. Spray control. Right, having just made the comment about quality, etc. It was interesting to look at the slide that Nora put up of the russet variety. I can't remember didn't write down what it was, and the impact of quality on different temperatures. I personally, from what I've seen and from my experience with what we are aiming to achieve with the chip shop sector, I'm not convinced that storage temperature is going to be an aid. I think it is a bit of a myth that we can do much to lower storage temperatures to aid spray control. Certainly, from my experience, to get any kind of control of spraying with temperature, you've probably got to be looking at getting down towards 6, 5, possibly even 4 degrees before you see much of a major effect. Okay, from 12 to 10 or 14 to 10, fine, but from 8.5 to 8, I'm not totally convinced that you are going to see enough of a difference to run the risk of potentially having a negative impact on the fry quality. So I think you've got to manage your storage temperatures according to what your quality of your crop will handle, rather than trying to worry about whether it will help with sprout control. And I accept that that is probably a slightly controversial comment. Again, it's a comment that various people have made looking at variety. AHDB released some interim work last year looking at, or this year, sorry, looking at dormancy of various varieties from date of tuber initiation to dormancy break. And there is a very definite difference in varieties. The work that they had done didn't always show that to be consistent for that variety year on year. So I think worrying about the dormancy of the variety, we've got to be a little bit careful to see how we take and use that information. What concerns me more is the propensity of a variety to sprout. I know that, for example, if I have got Challenger and Marquis or Agria, Challenger and Agria in the same store together, they have both broken dormancy because they've both shown some sprouting before I historically had put CIPC on them. But I know for certain that that Challenger will drive the timing of my next, or would have driven, sorry, the timing of my next CIPC application. So although the dormancy may be different on the two varieties, the propensity to sprout between varieties, I think, is massively, the lack of information is very considerable. So I think you just need to be careful. Don't get totally wrapped up with dormancy as opposed to the propensity of a variety to sprout, especially when you are looking at retreatment of any product whatsoever. Chemical treatment options, I must admit, looking at Nora's list, I sort of sat here and thought, well, I might as well give up and go home. Looking at the list down there, I will just say that there's two of those that are not available to me today. Maleic hydrazide, again, referring back to Nora's presentation, I would wholeheartedly agree with her that the earlier you can apply MH, the better. We would personally, as an agronomist, I would be looking at 5 to 7 weeks if I can, rather than 5 to 3. Okay, I would much rather put it on 3 weeks well than put it on 5 weeks 7 weeks badly. But the earlier you can get it on, the better. It's interesting. I've just done some calculations and communicate with Nora, and basically we're looking at very similar rates of the maleic hydrazide active itself per hectare, around about 3,000 grams. Obviously we're 5 kilos at 600, and very similar. So maleic hydrazide can work this year. For me, from what I'm seeing, actually I am not at all convinced it has done an ounce worth of good, and I would have to say that I actually think it has gone on as well as I could have done. I've got various residue samples in with labs for analysis at the moment to see exactly what we have managed to get into those tubers, but I'm seeing dormancy break on a lot of varieties that I would normally say are normally quite stable. DMN, the situation in across the water from you guys, we have been waiting for an emergency approval, which yeah, we'll see if and when it happens. As AJ hinted, we won't see this for use in commercial stores until next year. Orange oil, again, nothing that I've no experience, nothing to really add. It is available to you guys, I believe. Mint oil is a rescue treatment. I wish mint oil for me, for my process or for my chip shop crops and for my crisping crops, mint oil isn't a rescue treatment, it is the treatment. I've got nothing else available to me where I can be certain that I won't have an negative impact on fry quality. And interesting enough, the comment is a rescue treatment. The tuber on the picture on the right-hand side at the top, those chits were around about 1 inch long, and it took the top half of them out very nicely, but it didn't actually take them right out. And they started to chit quite nicely again 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, something in that region, from the base. So Where we have used it last year a little bit as a rescue treatment, it would not give me the sprout control that I would want for a full storage season, but used program-wise, I could be eating my words by this time next year, but at the moment, it seems to be doing the job that I want it to do. But interesting listening to Stephen's comment about condensation on crop. If you look at the bottom photo, that is mint oil with condensation, and basically washed up those potatoes. The mint oil had eaten into the potatoes and they went rotten about 4 weeks later. We are using ethylene. We've got McCain's in the UK who are pushing the use of ethylene. It's not something from my experience at the moment where I would want to rely on it for high quality frying material. The processor can handle material that the chip shops can't, and therefore I don't see it at this stage being used within the chip shop sector. But then, having said that, with assuming that we ever get DMN between that and mint oil, well, we'll see. I mean, I've got growers who are very concerned with mint oil. Those of you who have been involved with using it will know that it definitely does have a smell. It's interesting, again, with the comment about go in and smell a store for DMN to see whether you need it again. Well, one treatment of mint oil, you can smell that for the next 18 months. So it doesn't work along those lines for that product. But there is concern that the smell of mint oil will put some people off. I put some into a chip shop that had been treated after a fortnight, and I have to say that we could not detect any mint taste. So I'm hoping that my concerns over taint, etc., are very misfounded. And I think that was about it, Shay, from me.
Brilliant, Simon. Thanks a million for that. So can I ask all the contributors just to share their, or turn on their camera there again. Just while the others are coming in, Simon, while you have the floor, question that we were talking about, actually yourself and myself last week, was where you have prolonged harvest and you have maybe two different types of crop in store. What sort of ventilation, or how are you ventilating those crops where you have crop that's starting to cure and you have a crop that's wet coming in? What's your strategy there?
Depends what the store will let me do, Shay. I mean, I've got one box store we're still filling. We've been filling that now for 4 weeks, 5 weeks. That came in relatively dry, but I have got ventilation towers at the back, and I've got one turned on one side. So I'm sort of focusing a lot of air constantly blowing down one side of the store. And to be honest, it seems to be doing the job I want to. I'm flushing on a I'm just trying to think what it's set up, about every 4 hours. So I'm introducing some drier air, but I'm only running the rest of the store on recirculation cooling. So I'm not pushing anywhere near the amount of air through the rest. Otherwise, those first boxes would be dropping, I think about 6 inches to a foot more by now.
Great. Okay. Listen, thanks.
But in bulk stores, all you can do is just shut the ducts down. Like I say, during the day, blow for recirc, and if you can use the ambient air, if the humidity is low enough, if your dew point is there, then blowing straight ambient through. Otherwise, just recircing and purging, and then at night time, opening everything up and running the whole lot. It's just the royal pain in the bum, to be honest.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Just Nora and Stephen and AJ, you might just turn on your microphones as well, if you don't mind. Question here I have for you, Nora. There's been a lot of talk tonight about MH phaser, as we know it over here. And again, talking to Simon mentioned it here earlier on, that it doesn't seem to have worked as well this year as other years. Any comments as to why that might be and what guys can do to try and improve that?
It's a good question. It was interesting to see Simon's comments on that. And I would say that he's not alone in that. And I think that's why we in the US don't see probably MH used as much as well, just because the variability. I think timing can be a huge one. Even if you did put it down exactly when it was supposed to be, I agree with you. The weather can make a huge difference in terms of temperatures, in terms of rainfall coming afterwards. And I think, you know, we looked at a few split fields, commercial fields many years ago, where one half they applied to MH in commercial fields, the other half they did not. And it's interesting, one field, we didn't see the differences. Another field, we saw vast differences. Another field, we saw some differences. And I think that's just the natural variability of it. I think how maybe maleic hydroside moves to the plant, all of that, the systemic nature of it, I think there may be something as well. But unfortunate that it didn't work. What are your thoughts, Simon?
Well, to be honest, it wouldn't be quite so bad if it wasn't so damn expensive. For us, it's around about 80 pounds a hectare. Yeah, I mean, we've put it on this year, I would have said, in as good a conditions as possible. Generally, we had to be a bit careful on the heat. I could understand why possibly one or two of the non-irrigated crops, it didn't work quite so well. But at the moment, it actually looks as if I've got some non-irrigated crisping stuff. It's probably worked as best as anything. But it doesn't, to me, it doesn't. We're applying it on its own. It's a separate application. Your timings of dryness before and after with irrigation, your intervals with blight spray. It's not an easy product to manage. It's not an easy product to use. And I don't know why it's not working this year, which is why I've sent a raft of samples off just to see what we have got in the tubers.
Yeah, just a question here that's coming in on CO2 levels. I know you've answered it in the chat, and some people mightn't have seen it in the chat. Nora, just from your point of view, what acceptable levels of CO2 would you like to see in the store?
Yeah, exactly. There's just a lot of discussion about that. Nobody can really come up with a good number and what everybody feels comfortable with. But I would say in the U.S., for processing potatoes, anything that's going to go to chips or crisps, you're looking at 2,000 part per million, probably up to 5,000 part per million. Give yourself that range, depending upon who you are and what varieties in there. That's when we would go ahead and purge or require some sort of ventilation activity.
Stephen, you were saying then as well, in your experience looking at stores around that you're treating, that CO2 levels haven't been that big an issue, but the guys have purged the store before you've put in the DMN.
It was to flush the store first, but the few guys last year who had monitoring equipment in the store, one of them was letting it go to 3,000. And it was taking a long time to get there, so we didn't have to go back to him too often. Like, you know, over the course of that season, he was letting it run to 3,000. And I've heard of stores, AJ probably know a bit more, in the Netherlands and across Europe that are letting it go higher. And good results with tricolor, like.
Yeah, so just on the CO2 side of things, I'm sure we could have masses of arguments with Simon and Nora about the effects of CO2 quality, but we won't do that now. There isn't any real evidence to suggest that CO2 has an effect on fry colour directly. And there's lots of research going on, you know, HDB, Norway, you name it. And the best bit of work I've seen came from Canada in the first place, you know, from Barbara Daniels Lake. So I always advise people to look at that. Just in commercial experience, though, when we started to use DMN 5 years ago in the Netherlands, a lot of the crispers were really concerned about CO2. At that point, their recommendations, they were using somewhere around 2,000 parts per million. And every year they've moved that higher and higher because they're using electric fogging as an application technique for using DMN. They've also, you're not putting all the combustion gases in the store, and you're keeping the store sealed up for 48 hours. So you're having less of an impact on that anyway. And what they're finding is that they've moved those CO2 levels up for normal storage practice from 2,500 up to 4,500. And that was every year they've just been moving it up and up and up and up. And I think in terms of, like Nora said, I'm glad you didn't give a specific number. It's a range, and it'll be a range for a reason, is that some varieties, some seasons, some conditions will be more sensitive than others. And just to leave on that note is that, you know, you get CO2 for a reason, you know, and it's because the crop's respiring more, and it's respiring more because it's stressed for one reason or another.
Just on the treatments of DMN and AJ or Stephen, whichever, I don't mind. You've been treating, say, marquees. Most of the guys that are on the webinar tonight are going to be looking or working with marquees. So you might just outline a typical strategy that you're using in terms of DMN treatment in stores, ambient stores that are containing marquees.
I suppose, as I just said, it depends on many factors really in that store. The conditions of harvest, airflow in the store, layout, leak proof, and the length of storage. But to give some sort of an answer is, we'd be saying you should be starting as early as possible when the potatoes are dry with a 20 mil per ton application, and then kind of run from there really. Like by monitoring that store, you're watching for signs of sprouting again, and then run from that. Usually, look, it does vary completely, but you're kind of going in every 4 to 6 weeks or so with a 15 or a 10 mil per ton really. It's very hard to prescribe one thing for every store, but the first application is very important, and then you have control. Your hands are on the reins then really, and you can control it from there.
But am I right in saying, Stephen, your first application is generally 20 mils, and then you walk away after that?
Yeah, your first application is 20 mils per ton.
Yeah.
And then after that, your rates and everything like that depend on those huge amount of factors that you're considering.
And just another question to you, Nora, and I'm conscious of time now, we're just going to have to wrap this up in a minute or two. Just in your experience in the US, where guys are using both MH and DMN, do you see much of a difference in terms of the levels that you can use, the CO2 levels in the stores? Is there any advantages in terms of using MH and DMN in terms of management in the store?
That's a good question. I don't think anybody since we always use CIPC too, there's that overlaid, and that's, you know, just the background of our industry, and so difficult to say. Maybe AJ can answer that, but in terms of, go ahead, AJ.
Yeah, no, so no, you're right, Nora. I don't think that because they still have access to CIPC over there and various other products, they don't tend to use DMN alone, which is what we're trying to do predominantly in Europe. Just in terms of MH, you know, all the research tells us that if you get a reasonable amount of MH on, and yes, there is variability, it will help, and it will help you with DMN to reduce your dose rates. And also, when you're talking about active stores that you need drying at the start of the season, if you've managed to get a high rate of MH on, then it will give you a window in which sprouting won't take control before you can dry your crop and get your DMN on. So for me, yeah, definitely MH. If you can get it on, it will help you with storage. And I know we were talking about processing, but some data has also come out, and this could be interesting for chip shop guys. Is that actually, if you look at the data from Sutton Bridge on MH, even on their fresh stored trial, even after 9 months, you're getting an impact of MH. In other words, you get less sprouting when those potatoes are taken out of store. So which is quite interesting, and that might help again with the sprouting on chip shop potatoes without CIPC.
Two final questions. First one to you, Simon, and maybe Nora might comment them as well. Any problems with taint with mint oil?
Well, as I said, I mean, I took, it's always worried me because you go into a store that's just bit that mint oil a week ago, and you sort of, you know it for the next at least 3 hours. I took a sample of potatoes that had been treated 14 days earlier to my local chippy a fortnight ago, and it was purely for research purposes that I went there, and got them to fry them and peel them and everything as per usual, and we could not taste anything. I mean, we've got one of the largest, one of our bigger processors, processing process opposed to crispers in the UK using it. They've used lump last year. They're using all mint oil this year. I can't imagine that they would be doing it if they were picking up any kind of taint. You ask them and they'll say no. So, well, personally, we'll wait and see on the chip shop, but everything I've found out and been told so far, the answer's no.
Thanks for that, Simon. Final question then to you, Nora, and we'll let you off and go and get a cup of coffee after everybody else to get a go copy after this. Where do you see varieties going in the US? Is there going to be continued reliance on free varieties, or will there be more differentiation in crops in the future?
access to them. So we're just trying to find the varieties that fit the best situation. And I think we realize that it's better to have access to a lot of different varieties to allow us to fit the best varieties to that situation. So yeah.
Okay, listen, folks, I'm going to call a halt there because it's 20 past 6. We said we'd be finished at 6 o'clock. So can I, on behalf of all the participants, all the people viewing out there, sincerely thank each and every one of you for presenting tonight. There's been absolutely some fabulous information given over to us there over the last hour or so. Just in finally, there are questions out there that we haven't just got around to. If it's okay with the presenters, I'll send you on some of those questions, and you might come back to me in the next couple of days with your answers, and we can put them on to the video when we put it up on the Teagasc YouTube channel. Just as a final point, then, Larkin Burke from Board Bia, who was one of the participants here. He's doing quite a bit of work, or Board Bia are doing quite a bit of work in the background in terms of marketing and looking at where we can go with potatoes. We will hope to have another meeting in the next couple of weeks, just looking at the marketing of fresh chip potatoes. So look, just to point out, we'll let people know when that's going ahead. So listen, final thoughts. Thanks for everybody for your contributions tonight. Some, as I said earlier on, some very informative presentations, some great information there for people to digest. As I said, this webinar will be up in the next couple of days. So if you've missed something or you want to go back and review something, it will be there. So listen, all I can say is thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for your patience, and wish you well with your crops from here on in. Thank you.